Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. On the one-year anniversary of Osama bin Laden's death, we're joined in the studio by Rohan Gunaratna. He wrote the first book about Al-Qaeda after 9/11. It's called Inside Al-Qaeda. He is also the head of the International Center of Political Violence and Research in Singapore, an institute I worked with for a year. Rohan, welcome to Manila.
Thank you. It's very nice to see you, Maria.
Tell me, a year later, where are we? What has been the impact of bin Laden's death?
Al-Qaeda, the group that was led by bin Laden, suffered immense degradation. And of course, 1 year after the death of bin Laden, I like to share with you that two very important things have happened. One is his designated successor and his deputy, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, an Egyptian, has taken over the organization. Second is, Al-Qaeda itself has suffered very significantly, but now the Americans and the Europeans are planning to withdraw from Afghanistan, meaning that Al-Qaeda and Taliban will return to Afghanistan. So we will see greater instability in about another year's time.
Isn't this exactly what happened in the late 80s when the Russians pulled out, when the Russians lost the war in Afghanistan and the Americans also pulled out? I mean, weren't lessons learned then?
Yes, this will be very much a repeat of what happened when the Soviets were defeated and the Soviets left Afghanistan. The Soviets first came to Afghanistan in December 79, they left in February 89, and we saw that the United States and Western countries that supported the anti-Soviet multinational Afghan Mujahideen campaign, they didn't want to invest and build livelihood, create educational programs to mainstream the thinking of the fighters, the Afghan Mujahideen. So what happened was Afghanistan crumbled and it became a terrorist safe haven.
Haven, yes.
So the same thing is likely to happen unless the international community, especially the Western nations that have the discipline and the resources, they remain committed to the security and stability of Afghanistan.
But given that Al-Qaeda has been degraded significantly in the last 11 years, does it have the strength to come back and build a safe haven in Afghanistan or Iraq?
Al-Qaeda has suffered a lot, but still Al-Qaeda is a very capable organization. There are very capable people who are in the organization. For example, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri is a medical practitioner.
Yes.
He was head of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and he commanded the respect of so many other groups because he built, in fact, the global network of bin Laden. Bin Laden was a very charismatic leader,
Yes.
but Zawahiri was the real brains. Even if Zawahiri is killed, there is Saif al-Adel, who is an Egyptian former colonel, currently the head of the Security and Intelligence Committee of Al-Qaeda. So bin Laden in many ways groomed a succession of good leaders that will lead the organization.
But many of those first generation leaders, I mean, analysts have pointed out they were better educated, they were doctors and engineers, and many of them have been captured or killed. And someone like Ayman al-Zawahiri is not as charismatic as bin Laden. Is the ideology still spreading?
Yes, the ideology is the single biggest threat that Al-Qaeda is posing. That is the power of ideas, and these ideas become an ideology, and that is the biggest strength of the terrorists, particularly the terrorists who are in the Al-Qaeda family of groups. They know how to use the social media, they know how to use the internet platforms, and they know how to reach out to the youth. And today, for the youth who spend at least half of their time on the internet,
Yes.
you know, there's a convergence of real and cyberspace for them. So what happens in cyberspace is also real for them. And I think that this is one area governments will have to invest more to fight the future wave of terrorism.
How are they using social media now? I mean, how are they using it to spread terrorism?
Terrorists have created multiple platforms. Twitter is one. They have a number of blog sites.
Abu Bakr Bashir, the former head of Jamaat Islamiyah, has a Twitter account. I mean, so you're saying they've created platforms.
In fact, I can share with you, in Southeast Asia, the Al-Qaeda associated groups, Jama Islami has created Al-Tawbah.com, Al-Rahma.com. Al-Rahma.com is led by Abu Jibril's son, Muhammad Jibril, also known as the Prince of Jihad.
Yes.
He's currently in custody. He's a suspect in the bombing of the Ritz-Carlton and the Marriott hotels in Jakarta in 2009.
Yeah.
So the terrorists know how to use this. I recently went to Taipei in Malaysia and I interviewed the Al-Qaeda in Southeast Asia leader, Fadullah, and he told me how he posted his writings and his thoughts on Al-Tawbah.com. That is the most active website, extremist website out of Malaysia.
Yes.
Al-Rahma.com is the one out of Indonesia.
When I looked at Al-Rahma.com, it actually has on Facebook, they have a Facebook page and it has more than 54,000 followers, people who've liked it, which actually gives them a reach of millions if you go through it. Are authorities taking this seriously?
Authorities are not. In fact, today we have, I can share with you that there are about 8 to 12,000 extremist and terrorist websites, but there are only about 100 to 200 counter-extremist websites, like the Religious Rehabilitation Group
Your
website.
your institute actually
we have
countered.
worked very closely with them. Then we have a cleric called Ustaz Hanif.
Yes.
We call him the Mufti of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research, where you worked for a year. And I want to share with you that that particular blog site that continues to try to mainstream the thinking of the Muslims who may have deviated, who may have shifted away from the mainstream to the extreme.
You can actually even argue that it's easier now to recruit because when they use the net, they have a wider pool of moderate Muslims that they can potentially spread the ideas to. Why aren't the governments taking this seriously?
Governments are usually reactive. They always do things after an event. Governments do not think proactively. Only after an event they want to get their act together. And I think that the intelligent governments are starting to move in this direction. They have created programs to prevent, go to schools, speak to the youth, and create websites that are mainstream, create websites that websites and other platforms that expose how the terrorists and the extremists will approach you through the net.
Yes.
As if they are mainstream, you know,
Yes.
and radicalize someone, politicize someone, and mobilize someone, and militarize someone to conduct attacks.
Some analysts in the United States and in Southeast Asia are talking about these lone wolves, you know, that this is where jihad is going. Are they lone wolves? I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about how it's evolved?
Yes. Although we call Anders Breivik,
Yes.
the man Norwegian,
the Norwegian guy
who did a terrible attack. He, in one sense, he operated by himself, but he shared the vision and the ideology of many others.
Yes.
But of course, with the heightening of extremism that he imbibed largely through the internet, what we are seeing is that he became a very lethal weapon. He killed people, you see. So I think that is why we have to now address this particular issue. There is no bigger challenge today in counterterrorism and in counter-extremism to build long range and the short term and the medium range capabilities to counter a web that is increasingly supporting, facilitating, driving, enabling extremist and terrorist groups.
You know, in a conference here, they said that the criminals now, that the web is a playground for criminals. Do you agree with this?
Yes, in fact, most organized criminals now make most money on the net. Net is their bank.
What do you make, how would you describe the threat now in Southeast Asia and the Philippines in particular?
The terrorist threat has not plateaued. The threat continues to grow. The operational threat, that is targeting terrorists with weapons who are going and doing operations, this has reduced because of very good operational capabilities, very good cooperation between the security and intelligence services. But the very ideas of terrorism, ideas of extremism are spreading. Not only that, there's another very dangerous trend, that is the terrorist groups are operating not only underground, below surface, they are also operating above ground. They are working with political parties. Some of them have entered parliament.
Correct.
Some of them are having open media offices, for example, JAT.
Yes, JAT is Jama' Ansharut Tawhid, which is an evolution of Jama' Islamiyah.
Jama' Islam, yes. Yeah. It's, you can say, the new face of
Jama'
Islam. JAT is having open office in Jakarta, media office.
They have a media office. Yeah. Wow.
So I think that we have to counter the threat today, not only through covert operations, but there has to be a series of open or overt operations to reduce their influence, reduce their ability and the capacity to reach out, especially to the young people, and recruit them.
Why is government allowing that blurring of lines in Indonesia, for example? Why is JAT allowed to operate both covertly and overtly?
Indonesians believe that this is democracy to permit these groups. I personally don't think so. I think that they should be arrested, they should be tried, and they should be given very long, harsh sentences, and that will deter these people. So there are 4 principal forms of punishment. One is you have to incapacitate them, meaning put them in prison. Second is you have to deter them, deter the others who are operating openly by giving those you have put in prison long sentences. Another is you have to punish them, and fourth is you have to rehabilitate them and bring them from the extreme to the mainstream and make them good citizens, productive people in society. And I think that there has been an immense failure on the part of some countries in this region to do so. Philippines is one, because your legislation is very weak against counterterrorism. And I think that those who drafted that legislation, they should be removed, and you should bring a new group of legislators and develop a proper legislation that favors the law enforcement and the military organization. The legislation as you have it today in the Philippines favors the terrorists and extremists.
Well, this is funny because it's a difficult battle between the human rights groups and the groups concerned with security. Where do you draw the line? Like, part of the reason the Human Security Act in the Philippines is as liberal as it is, and the people who fight terrorism actually say it has no teeth at all, but part of the reason is because of this extreme concern of protecting human rights. Where's the line, Rohan?
I think it is paramount for us to protect human rights as we fight terrorism. Otherwise, we are going to lose the moral high ground. But it is very important that we are not cheated and tricked by the terrorists and by the extremists. So unless they abandon their views, their violent views, they cannot operate in the mainstream, because if you permit them to operate in open political space, they will use those opportunities to radicalize innocent people and recruit them.
Well, Indonesia says that it's protecting democratic rights, that people can say these things and believe these things. And in some instances, it's been very dangerous for you to actually speak as openly and as definitively as you have, right? I mean, you've had death threats.
Yes.
Please tell us a little bit more about this.
You have to be extremely careful, because these groups will operate against you and they will target you. But I think that this is a worthwhile discussion for us to have. We must all understand, especially my brothers and sisters in human rights, that terrorists are the biggest violators of human rights.
Yes.
The terrorist bomb kills people indiscriminately. It is not targeted. And if the terrorists move into the domain of chemical and biological, radiological and nuclear weapons, it will kill people in very large numbers. So we have to do everything possible to mainstream the thinking of those who become extremists, because it is those extremists, with the heightening of extremism, they become terrorists. So if we want to prevent terrorism, we have to engage them, we have to guide them, and we have to create better social and economic opportunities for them.
Yes.
I think that if we can develop those areas that are poor, develop those areas governments have neglected, then I think fewer people will turn towards criminality and towards violence.
Well, that's actually what's happening in the southern Philippines, right? You're seeing the Abu Sayyaf, a mixture, a nexus, a growing nexus between terrorism and crime in areas where governance is weak. How would you characterize what the Philippines is facing today?
Abu Sayyaf is a hybrid group. It's a part criminal, part terrorist group. After Abdul Razak Janjalani was killed, Katafi Janjalani came into office, he allowed the group to drift towards criminality. So kidnap for ransom has become their mainstay, and you can see that whenever there's a kidnapping,
Yes.
what happens? The Western countries, Western governments will get their private companies to give $100,000, $200,000, $500,000. Then Abu Sayyaf is rich.
Yes.
They will wear Nike shoes, they'll wear all the mod glasses, buy new uniforms, they will pay their supporters and sympathizers, more people join them.
Everyone benefits, the community benefits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that firstly, we have to advise Western governments, don't send your tourists to the south. Right now, there's a man from Holland who is the most famous bird watcher
Yes.
with Abu Sayyaf.
Yes.
We also have another Swiss national. So I think that
There's an Australian. Actually, we have an Australian, an Indian, a Japanese.
Correct.
There
Correct.
are many nationalities
Correct. Correct.
kidnapped in the south.
correct.
now.
And these are the two most recent kidnappings. So my view is that we should create those opportunities for the terrorists. But I also believe that Philippines have done a remarkable job, good job, in creating a very effective community engagement program. The Philippine Army is in many ways a model for other countries, how you have built water wells, tube wells, medical clinics, refurbished hospitals, built schools, built roads, created livelihood opportunities. I think this is the Filipino spirit. So I think that you should continue to do that. I wish the Americans did it in Afghanistan and Iraq. You see, in many ways, the Americans have been defeated. They have suffered a strategic defeat in Iraq and Afghanistan. They have left Iraq, leaving a country burning. They are going to leave Afghanistan, leaving Afghanistan burning. But the Philippines is the model success where the US provided some assistance. Largely the Philippine military operated, and you have stabilized that region. There are few hundred terrorists who are still around, and I am very confident that you will deal with them.
Why is it so hard? I mean, you've seen the Abu Sayyaf grow from 1,200 down, and now, sorry, not grow, but decrease. You know, in 2002 they hit more than 1,000 people. This is after the Sipadan hostages, and now they're down to hundreds, 200. Why can this problem not be defeated?
I believe that you are getting there, but it will take more time, more resources, more energy, more better leaders who will take high risks, who are very persistent and disciplined and focused on the mission. I also believe that you have handled the MILF issue
Tricky.
in a
It's
mixed
tricky issue.
way.
Yeah.
You need to invest more resources to bring them to the mainstream. Certainly, there are certain commanders like Commander Kato and Bravo.
Yeah, Commander Bravo.
Bravo. These commanders may not
Pandemian.
join the mainstream, but
Yeah.
still, what is important with Haji Murad to work out that peace agreement and make him even the vice president of your country, to bring him to the mainstream so that you can have so much of economic development in the south of the Philippines, you see. And I think that's a fantastic area with so much of resources. And I think the power of political negotiation and peace talks, I think that you need to invest more in that area.
Well, let's talk about the MILF, because they've been involved in peace talks with the government, but they were at one point a key ally of Jamaat Islamiyah and Al Qaeda. Is that correct?
Yes.
How has it evolved over the years, and why are you now very bullish about the peace talks? Which
I think that during the time of Hashim Salamat, there was a very close relationship between Jamaat Islamiyah and MILF. Very close to the Camp Abu Bakr, there was a JI camp called Hudaybiyah. And in fact, I interviewed the head of the terrorist training camp. It was Nasir Abbas. And also I interviewed many people who train in that camp. But of course, after 2000, this camp was dismantled because army captured
Camp Abu Bakr.
Camp Abu Bakr. And I want to share with you that Haji Murad, unlike Hashim Salamat, didn't tolerate these terrorists. He asked them to leave. I also debriefed Umar Patek, and he told me that he could not stay in central Mindanao. So he came to the Sulu archipelago, and
that
they
happened
survived.
in November 2005.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then they survived with Abu Sayyaf.
Yes.
So I believe that you need to put more resources with MILF and somehow make them feel that they are part of this country, part of this society. make the leader of the MILF your vice president. And I think that you can somehow bring these people who have rebelled against it. The Moro insurgency in the world is the world's longest running insurgency, you see. And I think that you need to do everything possible.
You're optimistic in the Philippines and yet pessimistic about the rest of the world and the possibility that what Afghanistan, the role it can possibly play in the next year. I mean, take us forward now. A decade after 9/11, people were declaring Al-Qaeda dead. Now it's 11 years after 9/11, a year after the death of bin Laden. What needs to happen now? What can happen, and how should authorities deal with it?
Al-Qaeda is a very resilient group, very robust organization, very resilient ideologically and operationally. It has managed to survive despite sustained counterterrorism efforts by the Americans and their allies and their friends. And I don't think we will ever have a group like that, because it was a multinational group, a global group, very capable organization, a very ruthless and a very deceptive group. But we are now coming close to the end of Al-Qaeda. That is why I think that we should not ease the pressure, that we should maintain the pressure until the last member of Al-Qaeda is captured, killed, or he deserts. And I think to withdraw from Afghanistan at this point is a huge failure. Obama is responding to popular voice, because he doesn't want to lose the vote. The American public, the European governments are also withdrawing their forces. The Australians are withdrawing their forces in January. Julia Gillard just mentioned. I think that government leaders should not do what the people want. It's a huge mistake to pander to popular opinion, because the people do not know the threat. So governments should do two things. One is educate the public. If you withdraw, this is what is going to happen. There will be greater insecurity. Al-Qaeda will go back, Al-Qaeda will strike again. We may have to again redeploy in Afghanistan. Second is, the American leaders, especially the Americans, they should meet and discuss, not only with their European allies, with the Chinese, with the Indians, with the Russians, countries that have large forces to redeploy in Afghanistan. Make Afghanistan the responsibility not of the Western community, but of the international community.
Yes. You said that now, in terms of Al-Qaeda itself, that it's dying?
Al-Qaeda has weakened very significantly, operationally, but ideologically Al-Qaeda is still very strong.
So it's evolving into something else?
Evolving. These groups under pressure are always mutating, you see, and I think that this is the wrong time to withdraw, because it will become something very big if they withdraw at this point.
Do you see it changing? Because the U.S. government has said, I mean, President Obama, when he came into office, had given that promise. Do you see this changing at all before the troop withdrawal, the schedule?
I hope the Americans will talk with the Europeans and with the other major powers, especially the Chinese, Indians, Russians, and work out a solution, because withdrawal from Afghanistan will not only increase the insecurity of the Western world, but the ring of countries around Afghanistan will be the first to be affected.
Yes.
The Chinese, the Pakistanis, the Indians, the Iranians, the Uzbeks, Tajiks, these countries will suffer a lot of instability, you see, and after that the instability will spread, because the terrorist ideologies are very infectious.
Yes. Just like 1979, I mean, it took. Okay, so well, that's a depressing scenario. Well, I guess your last words, Rohan.
I believe that the Philippines should continue to invest more resources in trying to bring the MILF to the mainstream, stabilize the South, and with that, Abu Sayyaf will have no support, and then you will have perfect peace in your country.
I gotta pick this up though. One of our problems there is that the level of corruption is high and there is no development. How do you handle that? I mean,
corruption is the biggest challenge in Southeast Asia, and I want to give you one example. When Lee Kuan Yew came to power in Singapore, the entire neighborhood was corrupt, but he didn't follow what the other leaders and the other countries were doing. He built a clean state. So I think that you need a very strong leader who will not allow his friends to cheat. But this requires a huge commitment. Firstly, the leader himself or herself will have to be clean, and then will be able to enforce very tough punishments and put his ministers and his senior officers in jail if they engage in corruption. So it requires a lot of will to create a country that is free of corruption.
That's certainly a battle that's ongoing right now. Where there's a Chief Justice on trial in an impeachment court, and we're seeing what's going on down south. So again, thank you so much, Rohan, for coming to speak with us today, giving us an outlook a year after the death of bin Laden, what problems lie ahead, Afghanistan's possible role, and the role of the internet as the new battleground. This is Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us.